When writer Stephanie Mensimer was diagnosed with breast cancer, she wondered why. That's natural. There are risk factors like age, but at 47, she was a decade and a half below the median. She wasn't overweight, didn't have a family history, never took hormone replacement therapy, bought BPA-free plastic bottles. So being an investigative reporter, she did some research, and there, plain as day, for anyone to see, she found a risk factor she'd never heard of: alcohol. In 1988, it was declared a Group 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. The International Agency for Research on Cancer finds that for every daily drink, the chance of cancer goes up 7%. The National Cancer Institute says alcohol raises breast cancer risk even at low levels of drinking. New Dutch guidelines urge people not to drink at all. And Harvard researchers found that overall, American women have about a 12% risk of getting breast cancer. But daily alcohol consumption, 2 to 3 glasses a day, raises it to 15%. Why didn't Stephanie Mensimer know this? Well, she found out as she researched her piece in Mother Jones. It's titled, "Did Drinking Give Me Breast Cancer?" And Stephanie joins us now. You're not saying alcohol did cause your breast cancer. You're saying what? That it was a factor that you could have controlled if you knew it was a risk?
Oh, definitely that. I was just really curious to know why I didn't know. I mean, I feel like, especially working at Mother Jones, that I knew about so many other things that might have or might not have caused cancer. You know, we've written tons of stories and, you know, there's everything from cell phone brain tumors and plastics and BPA. And the science on those aren't nearly as clear as it is for alcohol and cancer. And so I was really shocked that I just had never heard this.
It is a shocking, riveting piece that you've done. And there's more than 100 studies over decades that confirm the link. Give us some more of this compelling information.
Just for the basics, alcohol is implicated in about 7 different types of cancer. It's responsible, I think, for about 15% of all breast cancer deaths in the United States. The number is even higher for cancer that's a little more rare, like head and neck cancers, esophageal cancer. Alcohol is responsible for about 50% of those. And we don't talk about it in this country, even though it's one of the few things that people have some control over.
But you became especially interested in the effect of alcohol on women, and it's fascinating because risks are greater for younger girls, particularly binge drinkers, before a woman's had a child. Tell us more about how alcohol specifically interacts with breasts.
Well, women get kind of a double whammy. Alcohol can damage a DNA and it can really screw up your cells in a lot of ways. But for women, it also raises estrogen levels in the body. And in kind of the same way that hormone replacement therapy worked, it raises hormone levels and the cells multiply faster. And so there are more opportunities for tumors to develop. And the subtype that alcohol is most connected to is also the same kind of subtype that hormone replacement therapy caused. So they think that the mechanism there is very similar.
Yeah. Look, you mentioned 15% of breast cancer cases and deaths in the U.S. Are attributed to alcohol. And that, by the way, is 35,000 cases, 6,600 deaths. That's a higher risk than the BRCA genes, twice as many deaths as from drunk drivers. So all of this research is out there. In the late 80s, researchers tried to spread the word. In 1988, California added alcohol to its list of cancer-causing chemicals that required a warning label. The next year, Congress tried to include alcohol on warning labels. What happened?
The industry really fought the cancer message.
The alcohol industry.
Yes, the alcohol industry. That is something they really, really did not want plastered all over their products. They didn't want to be like the tobacco industry and have big warning labels to scare people. And so they launched a really interesting campaign. What they did was they changed the conversation and they went out and they tried to pitch alcohol as something like a health tonic. And they, especially the wine industry, went out and talked about how wine had been this great product for centuries, that enjoyed in moderation was considered something that would make you live longer. And over the years, they've promoted alcohol as something that you should, consume after your marathon or your triathlon. And they've tried to market it as something that goes right along with the healthy lifestyle.
Well, this was helped along by 60 Minutes and Morley Safer, a segment watched by 20 million people in which he talked about the French paradox, heavy food and wine, but good health. And he concludes it's the wine. Let's listen.
So the answer to the riddle, the explanation of the paradox, may lie in this inviting glass.
But Stephanie Mensimer, you remind us this was completely debunked later. In fact, France, as that segment was airing, was passing regulation on alcohol advertising because of the terrible liver cirrhosis problems the country was having. Even though it was debunked, the industry picked that up and then went further, co-opted scientists and people who are supposed to be studying the health effects of alcohol.
Yes. If you look at epidemiological studies, they tend to show that moderate drinkers have lower rates of heart disease compared to heavy drinkers. But it's kind of a flaw in the studies in that a lot of these early studies on heart disease and alcohol also included in their control group, they would compare abstainers to people who drank heavily. And the abstainers always looked worse than the moderate drinkers and almost as bad as the heavy drinkers in terms of health, because a lot of the abstainers were people who used to drink a lot and they quit because they had health problems. And so tons of these studies were plagued with this problem for years. And moderate drinkers are people who are already really healthy and they tend to make more money. They aren't obese. They get a lot of exercise. They have more health insurance. And so they're more inclined to not be a high risk for heart disease anyway. It wasn't until about 2006 that scientists started to tease that out and to correct for it, to show that actually, in fact, drinking doesn't really extend your life, and there's a lot of reason to be skeptical that it protects against heart disease.
Yeah. So is there absolutely no truth to red wine having health benefits?
There are some studies that are better designed that suggest there may be some heart benefits for people who fit into a really narrow category. They're over 50 and already at a high risk of heart disease. That basically excludes all women. But there are newer studies. They use biomarkers and this interesting work where there's an enzyme that people have that sometimes makes it hard for them to metabolize alcohol. So they naturally don't drink very much because it makes them sick. And researchers have started looking at those people, and the gene is randomly distributed. And so they make a good group to study. And those people tend to have less heart disease than everybody else. And they think it's because they don't drink. So a lot of people are taking a second look at this whole issue and kind of going back to the drawing board and thinking that maybe alcohol is much worse for us than we thought, and it needs more study.
By the way, we recently did a new study from the National Institutes of Health, Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism Institute, which had long recognized that alcohol increases breast cancer risks, but is doing a new study paid for by the alcohol industry to show that moderate drinking is beneficial.
Yes, there are a lot of problems with that study. For one thing, it doesn't even include anybody who has a family history of breast cancer. So it excludes all sorts of people, and it only looks at people who are over the age of 50. So any of the results that come out of it won't apply to most Americans. But of course, the industry would like to use it as kind of a health promotion message. They'd love to be able to put it on their products or on their ads. But as a lot of researchers I talked to said, if this were going through the FDA, you would never get alcohol approved as a drug. Because for one thing, there are a lot of easier and safer ways to protect yourself against heart disease, like walking or, eating vegetables, and that won't give you cancer. And, the whole gamut of problems that go with alcohol.
So your research showed 15% of American cases and deaths of breast cancer attributed to alcohol. What would you say to people who say, well, wait a second, we got many more binge drinkers than that in the United States. Everybody should be falling over with breast cancer.
Well, it's just like with smoking. Not everybody who smokes ends up getting lung cancer. We can't predict who will get it and who won't. But we can look over broad populations, and we can say pretty definitively that this is an issue and the bigger the population, the easier it is to kind of pinpoint what the contributor is to cancer. And this was one of them.
Drinking among women has increased by 16% between 2001 and 13. And you remind us it's because alcohol has been pink washed, products targeted at women, even at breast cancer events. There's alcohol with pink ribbons on it. But in some places, Australia, for instance, there's an ad where a glass of red wine spills onto a white tablecloth and morphs into the shape of a woman. The narrator says, alcohol is carcinogenic. There doesn't seem to be any doubt with the research. But what can we do with it? I mean, you talk about growing up in Utah, a non-Mormon, who drank a lot as a young person. Would you have had less?
I think so. I mean, I never smoked. And that was in those days, that was the bigger issue. And we knew that smoking would give you lung cancer and that smoking also was potentially addictive. And I certainly tell my daughter this, especially now that she's seen me go through breast cancer. So I feel like with younger people especially, it's really important to get that message to them that, this disease and its relationship to alcohol starts pretty early.
That's Stephanie Mensimer. We're going to link you to her terrific piece in Mother Jones, Did Drinking Give Me Breast Cancer? We'll have that at herenow.org. Stephanie, thanks so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we'd love to hear your comments and experiences there as well, herenow.org.